And now, your feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled movie review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck. Alongside, he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Bye, Matt.
Red Rocket, Red Rocket. Remember that South Park episode?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, today we are reviewing Sean Baker's Red Rocket, starring Simon Rex, Suzanna's son, and more. Eric, how you doing?
I'm okay. We're a little late on this review, but a big
Still opening
congratulations
weekend, right? Or
to
is it last
Simon.
weekend?
Last weekend in the U.S.,
Okay.
this weekend in Toronto, and I believe it's only playing at the Scotiabank Theatre at the moment.
If Spider-Man doesn't kick it out.
Yes, but also a big congratulations to Simon Rex, who won the
Yes.
Los Angeles Films Critics Award for Best
Actor. So I feel like the LA film critics really kind of nailed how me and you were feeling this year on some things.
Was that pun intended? Nailed?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Simon Rex, I think it's probably the best performance of the year, just to get right into it, but we'll kind of do our whole spiel. But like, good for him. I'm glad they had, the guts to do that, because I really do love his performance in this. And I feel like because he's Simon Rex, might be, because he's the guy from the Scary Movie movies. I feel like some people will dismiss him for that, even if this performance is really, really, really great.
Well, also because some people might not even know that he's from the Scary Movie sequels. They might think of him as a non-actor, or
That's true
if they
too.
do know him from his VJ days as an MTV VJ, or his solo
Adult.
performances or things like that, they just might think he's not playing a part. They just might think he's just playing himself, right?
Which might not be completely incorrect, but he's really good at it. And I mean, that's just good casting, I think, and good writing when you find the person who is perfect for a role, even if it's inspired by a bit of their, real life personality or what they've done.
Well, it reminds me so much, and I said this when we were kind of talking about it on our last regular episode with the Critics' Choice nominations and what we picked. The performance reminds me so much of Sylvester Stallone in Rocky, where it kind of feels like a second skin, and when he inhabits the role, to your point, it's perfect casting, but it's so believable and so lived in and so real that it's also a great performance. And I think like a lot of other actors, if they were cast in that role, it would ring false. There's a truth and honesty that Rex is able to kind of bring to the performance. And also just thinking as well, Stallone started his career in softcore porn when the Italian Stallion. So I think the comparison there is apt. And it's kind of, it's the narrative itself. You can kind of do that kind of John Travolta Pulp Fiction, Mickey Rourke the wrestler kind of thing, where this guy who's kind of known for these bit parts kind of burnt out in after the early 2000s, and now comes back with a role that is both a character piece but also a showcase for him, and then also just kind of working in an environment that is very kind of realistic and rustic, and at a point in time that is very pivotal in sort of modern US politics that has divided an entire country. I think is really interesting and worth having that conversation. But yeah, Red Rocket is one of those movies that you're either going to be in, or you're out in the first 5-10 minutes of the movie, based on Mikey Saber, who is an ex-porn star who hustles his way back to Texas City, Texas, his hometown, where he reconnects and tries to crash on the couch of his estranged wife, Lexi, played by Bree Elrod. And sort of there you see this kind of master manipulator with a desperate charm, able to kind of weasel his way into people's lives and use them to his own benefit. And as he's trying to kind of get his life back in order, we see him, go to, every sort of help wanted ad or job. And you made a really, really interesting and good sort of point about how hiring somebody who has an adult film star
Is worse than
background
being a criminal. Yeah.
criminal, and it does it twice in this movie, because the other one that it does, and we'll talk about this more with the story, but it shows you that the age of consent in Texas is 17, but weed is still illegal.
Yeah. No, and I think that's what makes this movie, so great. And I feel like, and Mikey being such an unlikable but charming guy, and which just makes him so captivating to watch, but then just makes you kind of go, you are a gigantic piece of shit who is only out for himself. But then that goes to what you just said, and I think is really interesting, because at the beginning of the movie, I think the movie's great. And I really like Sean Baker as a filmmaker, at least in his last few movies. Like, I like his little auteur kind of quirks of like keeping the same kind of font and style. I like his music choices with his opening credits, and like those little things that I always kind of latch on to with filmmakers. I just really, really vibe with. But then going into the general story of this, it is this kind of weird hangout movie with this one character who's trying to get his life back on track, but is he? And I think that's kind of really interesting, is that I feel like he was pushed out of an industry that he didn't necessarily kind of want to be pushed out of. So he had to kind of figure out his shit. And because he worked in it for so long, like I think there's a really interesting nugget there about, culture in the US of this guy who's trying to make an honest living, who is coming back to his hometown. He's still, taking advantage of his ex-wife and her
Well, wife,
mother.
he's still
And
married to her.
oh, sorry, his wife.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're separated. They've been separated for a while, but he goes back to her. He's trying to take advantage of her. He starts sleeping with her again, to just kind of, because multitude of reasons, but is just taking advantage of her and the mother. So there is some kind of, he's always out for himself. But what I really kind of liked was, analyzing, sex work and things like that, and how there's just been such a stigma on it. And I think it's done even better in a movie like Pleasure, which we saw at Sundance. At least focusing on, the adult film industry, and being and it's a much more serious movie and things like that. But what this movie does really well is what you just said, Eric, where I really thought it was fascinating when he goes to just try to work at a restaurant, or he tries to work at a cafe, or wherever. He's putting in his resume everywhere. And then when he finally, like, he's a charming guy, so he's always talking to the people doing these interviews. But like, when he reveals that, they're like, why haven't you been working for the last decade? He's like, well, I have been working, but I've been working as an adult film actor. And because, like, even before that, you get in these interview moments, a guy being like, if you've been in jail, no big deal, like, that's fine, we can deal with that, because that's like a little bit more private, you can kind of hide that, right? But because they see him as this adult film actor, where his videos are very accessible on certain websites. I'm not wearing my Brazzers t-shirt today, but I am wearing an Uh-Oh shirt. I just found that fascinating, where it's like, you can be a criminal, but if you did legal sex work, you can't work here. You can't. Someone might find out, and then that'll ruin my reputation. And then that drives this guy to making horrible decisions again, where he could have maybe been put on maybe a better path. He's self-destructive, so he might have, found himself back in the same spot as he does throughout this movie. But I really think that that's fascinating. That little nugget of being like, this guy down on his outs is like, I'm going to try to get a legit job, but then society is like, no, bro, we're not doing it. So he has to start dealing weed again. And then to your other point of being like, dealing weed in Texas is illegal, but he starts a relationship with a 17-year-old girl
Who he doesn't actually
and
care for in any way. He's an
yeah,
opportunist, because he meets Strawberry, played by Suzanna Son, who is
who's also excellent. Yeah.
amazing in this movie, and it's her first film, and she works at this local donut hole, and he sees this opportunity as a stepping stone to get back into the adult industry, to
It's
use
just about
her,
himself.
and
Yeah.
he's grooming her, and that's where the controversy comes into play,
Mhm.
because you're watching a character basically manipulate this young girl into
Child, really.
yeah,
Like,
into basically getting back into the adult industry, but also at the same time, it makes a Baker makes a very, and Chris Burgo, who's the co-writer, make a very strong stance ethically speaking, where they're not saying for you to root for him or not root for him. They're being very observational with the storytelling. But I think what you are trying to root for him when you are watching
Just
Simon
to do the
Rex
right thing.
is to finally make the right
Yeah.
choice in his life. The
And
one
that's why,
time.
and going back to that thing I just said, he almost at the beginning is sort of trying to do that. You don't necessarily know his motivations in that moment, but he is trying to make money, and then he's driven to deal weed again. But I agree with you that like he's not a good guy, and they never like, even though the movie is funny and he is charming and enjoyable to watch, he is a bad person objectively. So it's like the movie presents it in that way where I feel like something different. You guys can check out our Licorice Pizza review, and I have some criticisms of that movie and how it treats a relationship between an adult and a child, to what this movie treats an adult and a child, and they're both doing similar things, even though the like you said, the motivations of the characters are very different, which is why one is maybe uh worse but easier to watch than something that's, I mean, they're both bad in my opinion, but one presents it in a different way than the other, and I feel like this movie presents it as like what he is doing is awful, of grooming this young woman to maybe become a porn star, and he's starting this sexual relationship with her when, yes, maybe the age of consent is 17, but like it's still not okay what he is doing. But I feel like when it's presented in film in this way, it's like, okay, Mikey Saber is objectively a bad person. And I think on film, it is okay to portray people doing objectively bad things or just bad things in general, as long as you present them in a way that is that, or lets the audience decide for themselves. When it's done the other way, and Hollywood has this weird fascination with, adults having relationships with people who are on the cusp of adulthood. And
I mean, Woody Allen made a whole
yeah,
career out of it.
and we saw why. And I feel like that is always a little off-putting or uncomfortable for me. And I feel like, we are getting less and less of that now, but then you are seeing it in a movie like this in Licorice Pizza, but I just feel like they're handled in completely different ways. And we'll talk about that on our Licorice Pizza review, which you guys can check out. And Eric, you can comment it on here because I just did too. But you know what? I in this movie, because it's about Mikey and he is a bad person, that like I'm kind of like, okay, I'm fine with how they portrayed that, even though it is uncomfortable at times. And it's weirdly funny at times, but then you're like, oh, this guy is just the worst.
He's so repulsive.
Yeah, he's just so repulsive, and he keeps, like you said, you want him to make the right decision just once. In one of these situations, you want him to do the right thing because he almost this weird charm that he has, which is why you can see he was successful as an adult film actor, because he's charismatic and he has a presence to him, right? Like, and I feel like, and he has confidence, and like that exudes from his Simon Rex's performance, and that's what makes the movie so incredibly watchable. And then on top of that, what Baker's so good at is taking non-actors and using them in what feels like an authentic way, and showcasing a side of the US and just society that you don't necessarily see that often on film. And I know some people kind of see that as, whether it's
Exploitative.
yeah, and I totally see that argument. For me personally, I see it as him just, hey, I'm just going to showcase this. I feel like it is pretty authentic, but I definitely could see that other side of poverty porn kind of thing. I mean, that's the perfect
Well, that came up
term
with
for
the
this.
Florida Project as
Yeah.
well, right? Specifically sort of looking out on the outskirts of society, and specifically, a demographic of people that maybe aren't sort of ever spotlit in film. And I think
Or they're usually done in really cliched ways in
or
other movies.
caricatures. Yeah, yeah.
Caricatures, yeah.
With this, I agree with you that there is that conversation to have and a debate to have, but I don't think Baker is out to exploit the people that he's showcasing in this movie. He's basically intrigued and interested in them as people, and just kind of wants to follow along and see how this small microcosm works. And I think it is interesting, and it's obvious that this is set during Trump's presidential campaign in 2016, partly because Baker didn't want any traces of COVID in the movie. He was actually going to make another film and was going to shoot that in Vancouver, but that fell through because of the pandemic. So he kind of went to this. And when you're watching it, you can understand why some people who feel disenfranchised and on the fringes of society would vote for somebody like Trump or would gravitate towards somebody like Mikey Saber, because they offer something that is hollow, but at least it's something that they're being seen by this person, or at least they think that they're being seen by this person. And that's a really obvious kind of sort of observation with the Lonnie character, the next door neighbor,
Yeah.
where the way that Mikey Saber kind of takes him under his wing, and being a kid who is, you know, the next door neighbor and babysat by Lexi at one point, and sort of his dynamic with Mikey is really fascinating as well, and it goes to some unexpected places. The other thing I do want to say about this movie is that it is very, very funny. Baker has
Yeah.
amazing comedic timing, not only as a director, but as an editor. The way
yeah.
that he cuts certain scenes, or the way that cinematographer Drew Daniels, and it's all shot on 16 millimeter, and it has this kind
God,
of
it
like
looks so good, dude.
lived in quality to it. And Drew Daniels also has shot all of the director Trey Edward Schultz's movies, from It Comes at Night,
That makes sense for
to
me, because
Krishna,
I
and
love
things
the
like
look
that.
of all of those movies.
Yeah. And this movie specifically, again, like, it just has a texture and feel to it that is
that you just miss. That you just
and
don't
it's period appropriate too, in a way, because it is a period piece, even though it's a recent period piece.
Yeah. Totally. And I don't like being one of those guys. It's like, oh, film, I miss it. Like, but you do every time you see a movie like this that's shot on 16 mil or 35 or and stuff like that, even 60, that when you watch it, and again, comparing it to Licorice Pizza, go listen to that review, which I think we saw on digital, unless it was like the most pristine 70 millimeter print that I've ever seen in my life. But that movie still has a great texture to it. And you do miss films that were shot on film. So when you see one and see great cinematography on top of that, it's so refreshing and just adds another element to the movie. Like you said, like I feel like skin tones just look better, and like it just has this lived in quality that just matches kind of the sweaty, hot nature of Texas too, and him riding around on his bike, and like you said, it is just so funny. Even though this guy is like so repulsive and just such a giant piece of shit, you just can't help but want to watch everything he does. like
He's
I would
such
watch
a compelling
another
character, in the same way that you think of like someone like Oscar Isaac in Inside Llewyn Davis, or Adam Sandler in Uncut Gems, or Charlize Theron in Young Adult. The people that these actors are playing are despicable people, or unlikable, or at least prickly to a certain degree. But at the same time, I think you need to have movies about unpleasant people. It doesn't matter if your protagonist is a horrible person, as long as they're compelling or interesting. And Simon Rex's performance and the character that has been constructed in this is such a fascinating person, and a very flawed person, and it does kind of make you feel better about yourself watching it. But at the same time, I think it is a great movie for that, because it's showing you somebody that exists in this world that, you know, isn't going to be the star of a blockbuster franchise or something like that. Even though I really want Simon Rex to now be in the Fast and Furious movies, because there's a reference to him playing the Paul Walker version in the porn parodies, which I think is very funny. Great. So please, Vin Diesel.
He would be perfect in one of those
he would.
movies.
He'd be amazing.
I watched F9 again last night, or the last two nights. Nevis fell asleep halfway through, so we had to watch the second half last night. And he would be perfect in those movies, dude. Like, as much as John Cena sucks, too,
he could be like, Treado's other long lost brother.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love nothing more. But yeah, man, this movie is just so funny and just so enjoyable. Even with it being repulsive at times, and like the decisions he makes is just one after another, just the worst possible things a human could. Not like the worst, but like, again, he just keeps
pretty close to being
pretty close,
the worst. And again, like, every time he's so close to making the right choice or starting to kind of climb out of the gutter, there's always that temptation or opportunity that he can't help but try to grab for himself
Hmm.
instead of maybe, improving himself as a person. And that's
Hmm.
always interesting as well. And again, I think even like, NSYNC's Bye 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 and the way that it's used
It's
throughout the
used as a
movie,
bookend.
it's
Yeah.
it's fascinating because it also kind of plays into when he was probably most prominent as a porn star in the early 2000s, in the way that Rex was very prominent in the early 2000s as an MTV VJ, but also as kind of a
Scary
fledgling
movie. Yeah.
movie star. So it all works so well within the narrative of that song. And then it's also beautifully covered by Susanna's
Oh
son
yeah,
in
that's awesome
one
too.
moment
Yeah.
as well. And again, she is also so good
Yeah,
in
we
this
haven't talked
movie.
enough about her. She is
Um,
wonderful.
and,
Yeah.
and her character is really interesting in as well in terms of her own motivations and what she's doing. And there's one moment in this movie that if it was in like a romantic comedy or like a more straightforward drama, it would play out very kind of traditional. It's a proposal scene, but the way that
Right.
Sean Baker uses the environment is incredible.
And that scene feels like totally like on the spot. Like, guys, let's go do this right now because this thing is happening. And I don't want to give it away, but Eric is absolutely right. Like that, to me, that didn't seem planned. It
No,
almost seems like let's go out and do it right now because this would be very funny.
and it
And
is
like, yeah, it's
hilarious.
really good. And then one other thing I want to talk about is like the production design and just like the color palettes Baker uses, especially in Florida Project, which he then returns here to in Red Rocket with some of the pastels and pinks and things like that. It's not used like as much as maybe Florida Project, but I think when it's used, I think is really effective. And especially you brought in the NSYNC song, and just I think that last moment of the film I think is so great in both how it's using that song and with the color palette, and just you know just in the head of that character in those final moments I think is so great. And just seeing the juxtaposition between his life and Strawberry's life, and like and him trying to kind of pull her into his, I think is really really cool. And yeah, the use of Bye 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 is just fantastic.
And also just thinking about like how the movie does come full circle in a way, but also how there's the moment when he's trying to get back into Elrod's character's life, and he talks about like how he can't stay with his mother because she's in a nursing home. And I almost feel like he already tried to get in there. That's the kind of character he is, the way that he talks about like, oh, I can't stay there. It just seems like, oh, he probably actually tried to.
Yeah. Um, I love Baker loving donut shops as well. He
Yeah.
just, which is great. And it's just such a great location for the movie. And,
And it also
yeah.
plays very well like Baker. I mean, a lot of people know the Florida Project, and obviously with Tangerine like being shot on an iPhone, but then the movie that a lot of people kind of like first started kind of noticing him was for Starlet. And Starlet also kind of takes place partly in the adult world, and that's kind of where he started developing the Mikey Saber character. And that movie is a much different film where you have this kind of up and coming adult film star befriending a much older woman. And it's not a romantic comedy or a romance like Harold and Maude, but it kind of has that kind of like sort of very eccentric kind of friendship thing going on. And so anytime he makes a movie, I feel he's one of the best when it comes to sort of modern America and sort of
Hmm.
tapping into something that is very authentic and honest, and never exploitative. Even though you can have that conversation, he comes kind of from the same background as someone like Harmony Korine, or even more recently, I mean, it was talked a lot about with Chloe Zhao with Nomadland. So that conversation is there, but I just find it very interesting to see how he kind of integrates himself into these societies that don't really get shown. And if they do, they're usually either gawked at or turned into caricatures for the media.
Yeah. Like think of, oh my God, what was the Ron Howard movie?
Oh,
Um,
Hillbilly
Elegy.
Elegy.
Yeah. Like I just feel like look at the comparison there of looking like trying to do, not necessarily that the movies are about the same thing, but yeah, I think you understand what I'm saying. But
Yes. Yeah.
um yeah, and him using non-actors, like I just feel like it never stands out. It just always feels like these are real people, and he's so good at finding the right person to, whether they're improvised or whether they are delivering dialogue that he's written. Like I just feel like the scenes just feel utterly authentic and just like really lived in. And I believe everyone as these people as these people, or just, people that they're familiar with. That I just think it's great, man. I think it's one of the best movies of the year. It is one of the funniest movies in a long time. It's uncomfortable. It's one of the most unlikable yet likable characters that you've seen in a movie in a long time. And I think Simon Rex and Suzanna Son, who again we haven't talked about enough, but she is very, very good in the movie. I think it's great. I'm gonna give it a 4.5. I thought it was fantastic.
I'm also going to give it a 4.5. I echo your sentiments. I think it's a very funny film. I think Simon Rex is incredible in this movie. Susanna Son matches him in every scene that they're in together. I love the cinematography. I love the writing of the movie, the earnestness, the honestness. And again, it's not an easy movie to recommend, but it is one that I think has again, like we were talking about Nightmare Alley. You look at Nightmare Alley and you look at Bradley Cooper's character in that movie being this con man. There's not a moment in that movie that I would buy into his bullshit. Where with Mikey Saber, I kind of do a little bit. I can understand why people would be taken by him.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you all for listening. We have a lot of other reviews that you guys can check out right now. Eric just mentioned Nightmare Alley. You guys can go see that review or listen to that review. We'll have a review for The Kingsman, which might be up right now. Being the Ricardos, Licorice Pizza, which I mentioned, we'll be talking about a similar relationship. The Tragedy of Macbeth, The Lost Daughter, The Matrix Resurrections, The Tender Bar, Serrano, and more. If you want to find us, just search for Untitled Movie Podcast on YouTube. We would love for you guys to go subscribe over there, thumbs up some videos, even if you don't watch the video versions, like go subscribe over there. It really helps us. Comment, all that stuff kind of helps us get into the algorithm of things.
And doesn't Spotify have now ratings?
They do have ratings. So if you're an audio listener on Spotify, we would love for you guys to hit 5 stars or whatever you want to rate us. I'm not going to tell you what to do. The thing there is they only let people who have listened on Spotify rate, but there's a way to get around that. Even if you're an Apple Podcast listener or listen on other platforms, you can just go in and hit mark all as listened or whatever, like I've finished all these episodes, and then you can rate a podcast. So, or maybe I know a lot of people listen to podcasts on Spotify. So I would appreciate if you guys went over there and hit those 5 stars on both Untitled Movie Reviews, which is the show you're listening to now, Untitled Movie Podcast, and Untitled Movie Conversations. If you want a one-stop shop for everything, head over to Letterboxd, which is Untitled_movies. We post all of our YouTube videos there, all of our ratings and reviews, which have links to both the audio and video version. So just probably easiest spot to find everything that we do. Just head over to Letterboxd, Untitled_movies. As always, my name is Matt Rohrbeck. You can find more of my work, not on Pornhub, but around the internet at UntitledMoviePodcast.com. And you can follow me on all the social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
I'm Eric March, and you can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene
and on Pornhub
and on the social medias on my OnlyFans page at EM6211.
That's what Mikey Saber needs to do, is start an OnlyFans.
Well, was OnlyFans though? Like,
no, well, it might have been around, but it wasn't as popular with the adult industry.
He would now.
Definitely. Oh, Mikey Saber's got an OnlyFans. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, everyone, until next time.
Bye.